Union Arena, 5 advanced tips to level up your play. Number 1, advanced blocking tip. So let's say you are the red player with 3000 BP on your turn. You're facing against 3 green cards that have less than that BP. So when do you effectively block? So the question be, why does it even matter? They have 3 cards, I have 1 card. I'm taking 2 damage anyways. Why does it matter what the order is when I block? Well, we'll go through a few scenarios, but ultimately it does matter. So in the way that you would take more damage is that if you block last, you would have taken 2 damage and you only block the last attack. But let's say you do it another way. Let's say you block first. What would happen? So you block the first attack and then you let the second attack through. And what happens is you can actually get an active trigger. Thus your card gains 3000 BP and turns active, and you can block the last attack. So by blocking first, you have the possibility of blocking 2 attacks. But of course, you can also get other triggers like the special trigger or the color trigger that can affect your opponent's board. When blocking first, it is also optimal. Number 2, don't forget to push up cards. So let's say you're on turn 2 and you started first and you have this board. So let's say you don't need the energy to play other cards in your hand. What you should do is that you should push the card that you already have on the field, the 0 cost UG up, and then you'll play the 2 cards in your hand on the field. What is important is that now you have a UG that is active and can attack. Otherwise, you would have this scenario where you place a UG rested and you effectively missed out on 1 potential attack. So we'll look at another scenario where this is even more important. So let's say you're on turn 3 and you started second and you played your board like this so that you can have a 3 cost Kento Nanami on the field. So the most effective play would be to push your 3 cards up, allowing you for 3 potential attacks, and then playing your 3 cards in hand. So this way you have effectively 3 attacks that can attack your opponent and really swing the game in your favor. And especially with your Kento Nanami on the field, he has a 1 attacking ability, so you can use that also. Number 3, planning AP moves ahead. So this is especially important if you're playing a deck with 2 action point cards because they're a bit clunky, so you really need to be able to sequence your plays to be able to use your cards effectively and not block you from playing your 2 action point cards because effectively they can't be played last. And this is also important to sequence well in case you have AP restand cards, because if you've played all your 3 action points, you can't play your AP restand card. It has to be played before. So an easy way to do this, if you're especially a new player, is to put in front of you face down the cards that you will be playing. So let's say if you have 3 action points, you would likely be playing 3 cards. So put aside the 3 cards you want to play in front of you and then put away all the other cards in your hand so you can really focus on the cards that you will be playing this turn. So for example, if you have these 3 cards here, the sequencing is especially important because the first card, the special, needs 2 action points, so it can't be played last, even though it refunds your action point after you've played it. And the second card is a raid card that requires 5 energy. And for the first and second card both require Lelouch on your field. So let's say you only have 1 Lelouch on the field. If you use it to raid the Gwain, which is your 3rd card, you can't play the first 2 cards because the requirements will not be fulfilled. So the sequencing is especially important. More than likely, you'll play the cards in this order because you need to have 2 action points to play the first card. The second card, you need 5 energy. So if you use a back card to raid, you'll lose that card that you've raided on as energy. And thus you'll play the Gwain using your remaining energy. And if you only have 1 Lelouch, you'll be using that as your raid target, and thus you'll be using that as your raid target, so that it is no longer needed for the first 2 cards if you played the Gwain last. So overall, sequencing is especially important. I recommend using this little tip to be able to better sequence your plays. Number 4, not taking life damage early. So the general idea is that you don't want to sacrifice early board presence to save on life damage, because you have to remember that life is a resource. So especially in the early game, when you have cards that will die to your opponent's cards, you don't want to trade them. Instead, you want to take a bit of damage early on because you can potentially have triggers that really turn the tides in your favor. So of course, the best trigger is the special trigger because it sidelines an opposing card without any conditions. But also you can get cards like the draw trigger that effectively allow you to gain card advantage and to open up more plays that you wouldn't have had. But don't forget, you also have color triggers. So depending on the color that you're playing, this can really turn the tides in your favor, especially if you have the right setup or the right conditions. But don't forget, you can also have get triggers. These are kind of pseudo card draw in the sense that they will give you powerful cards to play on your turn that you wouldn't have otherwise had to do if you did not take the life. And also, very importantly, you can also raid on your opponent's turn if you have the required energy. And this is a very big swing in your favor if this happens. But overall, I would also recommend not to be a punching bag, because you should really not take excessive damage at the start of the game, because this will really limit your options towards the late game. So the idea is that you really want to think about how your triggers can affect the board. So you want to think about all the possible triggers that you can get and how they will affect your board. So if you don't have any cards on your front line, an active trigger is effectively useless. So this is something to really think about. And also drawing cards is useless if you can't play them. So if you have a lot of options already, if you already have your play set for the next turn, it's not really that useful to get hit and try to aim for a draw trigger because you already have available plays set for the next turn. So overall, you should learn what outs you still have in your deck to really take advantage of your potential triggers to not take damage that you don't really need to take. Number 5, taking too much damage. So this really goes in tandem with what we talked about before. But most importantly, you really have to think about, so you're not really safe with a full board, so 4 characters on your front line, especially if you just have 1 life. This is mainly because there are cards like Ichigo that have impact, so they will be able to go through your full board and deal that last life damage. So don't forget, you also can play your removal cards like the specials to be able to remove a character on your field. There are also cards that can bounce your cards, and there are also cards that can freeze your cards. Not only that, there are cards that can multi-attack like the Speedosonic or the Nezuko. So even if your board is full and they don't have impact, they can potentially attack you for 5 or 6 times, and this will deal damage for that remaining life that you have. And also we have cards like the Kirito that also multi-attack, but it also can bring up a card with impact, so to potentially hit you for your last life. So overall, you want to think about how much damage can I safely take, especially at the end game, to not lose the game. So the answer is really depending on the matchup, depends on what card your opponent has, if they have cards that have impact, if they are a multi-attack deck. The general rule is that you want to stay at about 3 to 4 life to be really safe towards the end game so that you don't get overwhelmed on your opponent's turn. And you can be at 2 life if you like to be a little bit risky, if you don't really have much options. But they really think about if you're left at 1 life, it's pretty much a certain loss because most decks can't get through a full field with their card abilities. So of course, this only applies if you have the option. If you're getting beat down and you don't really have the option to not take life, this is not something that applies. The idea is really just to be not overly greedy with trigger checks, because you can lose games that you would otherwise have won just because you didn't chump block one of his attacks just to be able to get a trigger check that you didn't need for the game. Alright, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more videos.